I can't get it out of my head. I grew up with those. We are live.
We are live streaming. All right. Cool.
Not yet, no.
Nope, doesn't say.
Shall I hit fresh? Okay. All right.
All right.
Not yet.
Nope.
I see it.
We,
I see it.
we don't see it.
I see it. There you go. I saw it.
No. If you hit refresh,
All right.
it should appear.
There you go.
And all of our wonderful technical.
Should be black screen.
That's that one. Scroll down.
Is there?
Nope, next one. Next one. Next one. Right there. Up. You see it to the left?
Oh, there it is. Okay.
All right. Get big.
All right.
There we go.
You can talk. People are listening to you.
Cool.
Oh. Well, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
So I will officially begin the show. So welcome to Up Close. I'm Randy Dixon, Artistic Director of Unexpected Productions. And I'm wearing a UP improv mask. And
Not yet, not yet.
Not yet?
No, not yet. I was saying they can hear you talk.
Oh,
Oh, they can hear us talk, but
They can hear this too. Hi, everybody.
all right. Well, let me know when I can officially start.
there we go. Oh, there it is.
Look at that, it's fancy.
Amy Sedgwick says hello.
Who did?
Amy Sedgwick.
Oh, Amy. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
Hello, and can I officially start now, Jay? So this is Up Close. I'm Randy Dixon, Artistic Director of Unexpected Productions, and I'm wearing official UP mask, and joining me is a guest who I know pretty well, and you might know pretty well as well, which is our UP Marketing and Development Director, Kent Whipple. And we're, I think, far enough apart that we can probably take,
Yeah, I think
take
so,
these
too.
off. So, and we even have a little moat between us, so that's cool. And today we're going to be talking about storytelling, but before we do that, a couple of housekeeping things, I guess. One is we do 4 shows a week, so right now we're doing shows Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Wednesday we have duos, Thursday we have wild card, and Friday and Saturday right now we're doing improvised Christmas Carol. And in a week from now, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, we're going to be doing it also on like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday leading up to Christmas Eve. So if you want to get your holiday fix, feel free to do that. We're going to be doing hopefully at least one more of these before the end of the year, and we'll do a bunch in the new year. If you enjoy our conversation, we're talking about storytelling and teaching storytelling and what stories are and what they mean. If you enjoy that, feel free to go to unexpectedproductions.org and make a donation. But also, we're having a fundraiser on December 19th. So that's a week from today. We will be doing a very special improvised Christmas Carol. So we'll be trying to raise some money to hopefully, again, help with the reopening and keeping this market theater space that we've been in since 1991. So again, you can find out all the details about that, and I'll try to remember to mention it at the end at unexpectedproductions.org. But and also, because I always forget, even though they're right here, if you want to, you can also donate by buying a t-shirt. And we have an audience full of t-shirts here. And what you can do is you can put an image on the t-shirt, it will go over a chair, and they're also marking socially distanced, so if eventually, maybe one day, in 10 years from now, we'll be able to have people back in the theater, your picture, your face, whatever your image is, will be on your chair, and when we can have people back in the theater, you will then get the souvenir t-shirt to keep for yourself. So I'm glad I remembered that. Anyway, let's get to Kent.
Hi, Randy.
Hi, Kent. This is kind of weird because I feel like this is like a chat we would just have sitting in the office.
Totally. Totally.
So,
And we'd be 6 feet apart in the office as well.
So I usually begin these by just getting a little background from you about sort of, I don't know, how you got into, I know you have a theater background as well, so what I'm curious to hear is sort of how you found that in theater, and then how you specifically found storytelling.
Well, I've always been a fan of storytelling. In high school, I did theater, but I also did speech and did humorous interp. And we'd figure out how to take a 2-hour play and put it into 10 minutes and create a story there. Then I went to school at the College of Santa Fe. I worked as an actor for a while and did stand-up as a while. I was really a terrible stand-up.
As was I.
Yeah. But then went to school at the College of Santa Fe and studied arts admin and got into press releases and writing press releases, which are basically good stories.
Right.
And did that, then worked for the Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper, writing for them, and got to work with Denise Cazell. Denise, if you're out there, I love you, who was the hardest editor I've ever had, but taught me, again, story, how to, beginning, middle, end, make it interesting. And I just had a passion. So started listening to The Moth a few years back, 10 years back or so, when it first started coming out, and decided that I wanted to do that. And so 7 years ago, 8 years ago, did The Moth. The first time I did The Moth, I won, was lucky enough to win the first Moth that I went to with my friend Danielle. And I've been geeked out on story since. I love this. That's how we communicate. We communicate stories. I'm telling you a boring story about my past to create a story. But it's how we learn as kids. It's how we communicate with each other. You know, you come home, your spouse says, "How was your day?" And what do? You tell a story.
Right.
And so started doing a lot of shows around here, including the Gay Uncle Time, Bawdy Storytelling, which there's a Bawdy Storytelling show tonight online. Dixie, if you're there, that's bawdystorytelling.com. I kept doing the Moths. Then Seattle has the blessing of a wonderful, my favorite storytelling show that I've ever done or been involved with, which is Fresh Ground Stories with Paul Carrington, that happens once a week. And then luckily you guys, when I came to you and Jill about teaching it, you guys were very gracious and let me become the resident storytelling coach here. And I'm finding the more I do it, the less I know, the more I learn. You learn so much from teaching. And I love doing storytelling, but more and more I love teaching it. And I'm going to guess you might experience that when teaching improv. You probably...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably, I mean, shows are shows, and I love doing shows, but there's a certain, I don't know, satisfaction in teaching.
Yeah.
When you see somebody get it, or, you know, pick up something new, or see something in a new way.
Well, you know, I was listening to Mike Birbiglia's podcast the other day, and he had Natasha Lyonne on it. And I'm going to be doing an impersonation of Natasha Lyonne doing Elaine Stritch. Because she had a great Stritch quote, which says, you know, you got to develop the talent behind the talent.
Right.
And I think when a student comes into a storytelling class or an improv class, they already have the talent. It's that we get the blessing of trying to promote the talent and coaxing more talent out of the talent. And I don't know, that quote has stuck with me all week. Develop the talent behind the talent.
Well, it's sort of like in improv, and maybe it's true for storytelling as well, that notion of a good or great storyteller, improviser walks into the room, and all you're doing is like honing and shaping and doing that, but they had that to begin with.
Right.
It's like you don't create that in them, but they then take it and run with it. But so really good improvisers then come into the room. They're really good improvisers, and all I'm doing is trying to shape them and give them tools to help them be even better, and to run with that. So
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting, teaching online has been, storytelling works online really well.
right.
There have been some great shows. Storytelling shows have proliferated during the pandemic, which is really neat. And it's so funny because it used to be territorial. There was the Seattle Storytelling Group, the New York Storytelling, the Chicago Storytelling. Well, now Seattle storytellers are doing shows in Chicago.
Oh, great.
Melissa Reeves, who's one of our ensemble members and a former student of mine, she took my class several times. She just has blossomed as a storyteller and has started her own company, Melanin Stories Matter. Melanin Stories Matter. But she was just doing a show, I think, that was in California. And so it's been kind of neat. But it's something that does work online. But I don't know, are you finding that stories are connecting through improv online, or what are you finding with that?
Well, I think there's a little bit of and maybe you can also add to this. There's a little bit of difference. Like, so if what I find and I haven't done a lot of the storytelling shows in terms of watching them, but if you're coming out and telling a story, then it is sort of like you can play it into the camera, and it's your story and you're presenting it. The problem I find with doing improv online is that lack of connection, where if I look in the camera, then I can't see what anyone else is doing, and if I look at the person, then it looks weird because I'm, so there's no real direct connection that I imagine for storytelling would be different because you're presenting your own story.
Yeah, it makes it easier. But you guys are doing that like with Christmas Carol. You're making some really nice emotional connections and creating the story. And looking at each other. But yeah, it's easier when you're just there looking at the green dot and sharing your story. My friends also, Janina and Nessa have Out Loud Storytelling that they just had a show out on the coast.
Yeah.
And just neat. It's just so neat to see these storytellers connect with audiences because that's what it's about. That's why we're storytellers. We want to make a connection, right?
Right. But is it the same? So you're saying it works online, and I can totally see that and have seen that. But does it feel different than when you're in a room with a bunch of people telling your story?
Yes and no. I mean, when you're on the stage, you're trying to make connections with the audience by eye contact, by your vocal inflections, but online, you're able to just make that connection with the camera and then really hope that you're translating that into it and the audience is picking up on that. So yeah, I do think it's the same but different. It's the exact same, only completely different.
Well, I guess the other thing, follow-up to that, is when you're doing a story online and playing to the green light, are you playing to the green light or are you imagining somebody there that you're telling the story?
I imagine, for me, I'm talking to one of my very best friends. And it's one of my friends, Kathy, or Kristen. I imagine that I'm just sharing a story with them. Because when I write, and it's getting worse, because when I write out a story, I've been reading a lot of writing memoir. I think you and I were talking the other day, Mary Carr's book, The Art of Writing Memoir, is just with me. When you read something you write, it comes off so non-conversational. And it doesn't, it's a great memoir, but it doesn't connect. So you have to translate that from the page into a conversation and creating it to be conversational. And so I just look and imagine that I'm talking to one of my friends saying, you wouldn't believe this, but.
So if we had an arc for teaching storytelling in your class, where does that start and where does it go? Do you start with just like, come up with ideas and then hone them along, or do you start with something
Well,
else?
how I teach is through using writing prompts. And I was lucky enough to study with Natalie Goldberg, who wrote Writing Down the Bones.
Right.
And side note, funny story. I studied with her for a while, and she was here a year or two ago doing a book reading. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to go see Natalie. And I got down there, and it was at Elliott Bay in their basement. And I'm like, hi, Natalie. And she's like, hello. I'm like, I'm Kent. And so she's, hi, Kent. And she writes it in my book. She's tiny. And then started telling it, and I was like really bummed.
Right.
And I was like, well, I guess I didn't leave an impression with her. Then she's reading, or she's doing a reading, and then she stops and she's like, looks at me, points at me, Kent, hi, now I remember. How are you? And I was like, oh, good, because I thought you hated me. And I was taking it all personally. Anyway, Natalie has great writing prompts, and great stories come from writing prompts when you can get out of your head.
Right.
So when I teach a class, we talk about basic story structure, you know, something we do in Improv 100, right? And I've been getting down to it because really storytelling is you were this person, something happened, you're now this person. And that's really the crux of a good story. Of course, you build all the elements of stakes and all that, but the connection is about someone relating to you about what you went through and experienced and who you are now.
Right.
And that's become like the core element of my class. Sure, we talk about beginning, middles, and ends. Basic storytelling 101, you have the hook, a great sentence or paragraph that says, I'm pulling you in. Then you build the stakes of the incident, of what's going on. Then the incident happens.
Right.
Then who are you now? What did you
Right.
learn?
So, yeah, because those are story structure techniques we teach in improv as well. And it's come up a few times in different interviews and different contexts, but it's that, and I'm sure it's true in storytelling, which is people think, well, I've got the structure, so I've got it. But there is that secret ingredient, that thing that, you know, what makes that story more, because you can follow, you know, pick your poison as far as the story structure goes, but it's not going to help you in terms of, you know, being a good storyteller.
To me, it's all scenic detail. How do you share the scenic detail? I was with a friend's 7-year-old kid. I'm going to pick on a friend, sorry. And the kid was like, so I was at school today, and then my friend came up, and then I walked up, and my friend hit me, and I'm like, oh God, you need structure. Terrible storyteller.
Right.
Terrible. But no, but it got me that a lot of people think stories are just the news. The news is narrative.
Sure.
And narrative description. So I teach narrative description and scenic detail. Narrative description is driving the bus. The scenic detail is what we see out of the window while we're driving. And that's what creates the connection. And how do you do that? You share inner thoughts. You share sensorial detail, which is one of the big basics of storytelling. You know, the smell of my grandmother's fried chicken helped me remember, or, you know, brought me back to, and we all can remember our grandmother's fried chicken, so as a listener, we relate to that. I'm taking a wonderful story workout weekly with a gal named Gail Thomas, who's like a storytelling sensei to me. And we're spending a lot of time on that part. What is the connection? What creates the connection with the listeners? And again, I think it's the scenic detail. And you do the same thing in improv. What is Crow, right?
Right.
So you create characters, relationships, objectives, and where, right? You put all of those exact same elements into a story.
Right.
And so I use Crow in teaching all the time. And then the Story Studio, which is Risk's educational component, they have some great workshops on just that part. They actually had a workshop on sensorial detail. They have a workshop coming up on Tuesday about how to be the villain in a story.
Right.
And I'm kind of babbling here, but one of the things I've loved about COVID, if we can we say that? Is I've gotten more writing done than I have in my life, and I've taken some great workshops with organizations around the country, and this is going to sound terrible. You still take classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are many classes that you take where you go, okay, I can teach this.
Right.
In fact, I'd probably teach this better. But you get something out of it, and we learn, because we should always be learning. Or you take a class and go, oh, God, why have I never thought of that? Why didn't I see that? This is so obvious. And I've had those aha moments in some classes that I've taken that have been fantastic.
Right.
That I'm excited to teach this new run because it makes you a better teacher, right?
Right. Yeah, and that to me is an important part to the teaching aspect, is to always be kind of, it's like being a chef and not eating.
Right, right.
So it's like you gotta do stuff, and yeah, and you're absolutely right. There are classes that I take where I'm kind of like, and then. But a lot of classes will have a few eye-opening experiences. You go, why didn't I think about that? So
yeah, I'm working on a story that I'm going to be pitching to Risk on Monday. And, you go back to a story. This is an interesting thing where improv scenes, you do them, it's done, it was magic, and it's given a gift to the universe, right?
right.
Well, in stories, what I'm learning is, like I now have a good wealth of stories, but I go back and one that I'm pitching is a story that I did a while back. And now I'm a brand new person. I'm a different person than I was when I first created that story, when I wrote that story. So in turn, it's finding it to be a brand new story.
Right.
And trying to apply the lessons of improv through that.
Right. Have you, trying to think of the short way to ask the question. Have you ever started working on a story and then totally just surprised yourself? Like what came out, what you reveal, what you ended up telling?
Yeah, or how it evolves and was not the story that was intended.
Right.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. In Mary Carr's book, she has I'm going to mess up this quote. She says, fiction writers have meaning and create scenes around it. And memoirists, or storytellers, have memories that they create meaning from, or experiences that they make meaning from.
Wow.
And so I'm finding the more that I'm doing this a long time now, that storytellers, the ones that I love, it's easy to share, hey, I got to ride on the space shuttle, and this happened. That's really an exciting story.
Right.
But it's to take a story of walking down the street and this minor experience happened, but it could have been life-changing, and making that an interesting story. That's what I'm finding really interesting in storytelling right now.
Okay, so that opens up an area that we can spend some time in, which is, you obviously teach storytelling here, other places. You're performing a lot of stories, but I think one thing that we talked about briefly just yesterday, actually we didn't even talk about, it was just mentioned, was the notion of sort of the purpose of storytelling amongst ordinary people who are not performers, who are not doing stuff. And one of my most favorite experiences was we did a show called, and we've done it several times, called That's Life, where we interview people about their lives. And one of the times we got a bunch of folks from the senior center over a few weeks, so across the Pike Place Market Senior Center, and each one of them was over 90 years old. And just the stuff that they talked about was amazing. They were these amazing storytellers, but they weren't storytellers, so to speak. They weren't like performing the story. They were just talking about stuff. So,
Well, we're ingrained
right,
with story. It's in our DNA. It's genetic. Again, like I said, it's how we learn. our parents read us stories, so we learn morals and lessons from that. We get instruction from stories. We learn lessons by living through other people's stories. So, I mean, it's in our culture, and everyone's a storyteller, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
So-
absolutely. When I teach story structure, I tell students that I'm not teaching you anything about story. You already know all this. All I'm doing is labeling it so that we can talk about it. But if I said, hey, what'd you do today? You're going to tell me this really well-crafted story, probably, that falls into this structure. And so let's just label it and talk about it. And the second thing was, and this is kind of interesting, I wonder if you come across this teaching or in storytelling. I used to teach narrative to some college kids. So they're in their early 20s or whatever, and we talk about it, and I would use their lives. I said, get up and talk about your life. And it was so amazing to me how many of them had never thought about their life as a story. I mean, it was like a big surprise.
well,
Like,
because
right.
you've been doing story since, high school. So that's
Yeah.
for you. But yeah, isn't it funny to see someone go, oh yeah. Or I love in class where someone says, I don't have any stories. I mean, I had this experience where,
right.
all
I
of a
rode
sudden
on the
they're-
space shuttle.
riding the space shuttle or being chased by a militia, but that's not really a good story. And I'm like,
Why do people, because what strikes me is if you have a student in class that says, I don't have any stories, my first question would be, well, why are you taking this class then? So why do people...
That I don't know. Maybe it's an insecurity that, they know they have some stories instinctually, but they don't think people will be interested, but again, I go to the Moth. I love going to the Moth and watching the Moth. The Moth is tough because I hate seeing people being judged on their stories and being rated, but it's a great training ground and it's a great way to see, because you have folks who are storytellers who go, but then you have average, everyday people that go up and share a moment of their life on stage in front of a bunch of strangers in the dark,
Right.
and we fall in love with them. And like my grandfather, my mother's father, Bryant Cisco, was just one of the best storytellers. I remember just as a kid, not knowing what it was, but sitting around the kitchen table just fascinated with everything that he would say. And some people just have that.
Right. Did that run in the family?
Well, no, my mother, God bless her, Mom was a great audience, but she was a terrible storyteller. God rest, Mama, sorry. But an amazing audience. But like, she'd start telling a story and she'd be like, well, there was this guy named Herbie. Could have been Jacob. And Jacob Herbie, he was like, they were in Chicago. Might have been Minneapolis. And that's how my mom would tell a story.
Right.
But, oh my God, if you told her a story, she'd just sit and laugh and give you so much love.
Wow.
And so I think that's one of the things I started doing. It was just, I'm the youngest of four, and to get any attention in the family, I had to share stories to try to get any of the attention from my
Right.
siblings and parents who just loved me and just thought I was the funniest, cutest thing in the world. But, I was sitting there thinking, I woke up this morning and I was like, remembering a dream. And I was like, my God, human beings, we like stories so much that when we're asleep, we're making up stories in our heads that we can't help ourselves. It's just what we
Right.
do.
Right. Well, and it's that thing I puzzle over and over again and don't have or have not found an adequate answer from somebody smarter than me, for sure. And it's funny you bring up dreams, because it's that, why do we dream? Why do we tell stories? Why do we, that kind of thing. And it is part of our process. So in a way, telling stories is like breathing or eating. It's just what we do. But it's like sort of like, what's at the core of that?
Yeah,
Why do we do it?
Is it instinctual? Is it so important to our core being, survival? I mean, sure, stories where, we learn from our ancestors, don't eat that berry and don't do that, and this is how you make a fire. And so maybe it's just, again, ingrained. I've been reading another book, and I'm sorry I don't remember the author, called The Neurology of Storytelling.
Huh.
Have you heard of that one? And it's, again, chemical responses. When we talk about stories of love, and when I fell in love and I experienced this, the listeners are creating oxytocin in their heads,
Right.
in their bodies. When we talk about scary stakes, and I tell a story about having a Czechoslovakian army officer pointing a red light on my chest from a gun.
Right.
Hopefully if I'm sharing that well as a storyteller and I'm sharing my fear, that is creating cortisol in the listener's brain, and to relate to it, that then they relate to the story because of the chemicals, as well as the skill of a storyteller being able to share.
Right.
But so often when we're listening to stories, watching movies, improvs, plays, our bodies are experiencing all kinds of different hormonal changes, which is why we relate to some things better, why we remember them better, is because of the chemical response that our brain created, because the storyteller was so good that it created that in our bodies.
Right. And one of the things that I come
I
back...
said we were going to geek out on stories,
Yeah,
and that was
we're-
probably one of the geekiest.
Right. Well, I'm going deeper into the geek, so, which is the notion, and again, I talk about this a little bit in classes sometimes if it comes up, but I also find it interesting. I think it was Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, coined the term healing fiction, which was the idea that the person in therapy heals themselves simply by telling their story, and that sort of healing power of storytelling. And and I'm wondering, how often does that occur in like the events that you're at, or are people kind of presenting as my polished story that I perform, and it's like doing a stage play,
Right.
Versus people who discover something new about themselves or heal themselves somehow, right in front of an audience or right in front of a group of people watching the story. Does that happen often?
Yes. In fact, I say storytelling is healing, but it can't be therapy.
Right.
And so it's that fine line. And then again, sharing a story of something that happened to you that you're a little past the experience, I've heard this quote attributed to several different people, but tell from your scars, not your wounds.
Right.
And I've seen some just great storytellers go up and share something that I just totally relate to, can cry, my heart goes to. Then I've seen some go up that are so polished and actors, and don't act when telling stories, don't. And that's when I knew my father loved me. I'm like, oh, shut the fuck up.
Right. Right.
Because we know fake stories, we know lies, so we want to relate to each other through authenticity. And so that's one of the biggest things that I teach is vulnerability and authenticity.
Right.
And that also is something that is in our school and that we teach in improv, right?
Yeah, definitely. Because to me, it's like, well, why are we doing it in front of a bunch of people? It's not for us
Right.
to process it. It's to crack open the story to share with everyone else, so that everyone else, you were mentioning earlier, talking about, your grandmother, the smell of your grandmother's cooking. And that's what you're trying to do, is to evoke in everyone that memory for them, which
Right.
might be their cooking, could be something else, but it's not so deeply personal and about me.
Right.
It's about them. And kind of leads to, it's not so much about storytelling, it's about, I think, performing in general, but one of the things that harp on is this notion of being advocates for the audience. So our job is to be an advocate for the audience.
Yeah.
Like, what's the story you want to tell? And I'll tell you that story in improv. It might be trickier, maybe not, in storytelling, especially if you're, preparing something and, I mean, how do you consider your audience?
Well, your audience is, we're there to make the connection with the audience. Same as any performers. But there is this, I don't want to call it a lie, but a pretend that storytellers are pretending that they are sharing this story for the very first time, and audience members are pretending that they just are up there creating it, and that they just had it.
Right.
And so it's an agreeable lie.
Right. And maybe that's the difference, because when you mention that, that's something I've noticed a lot in storytelling and other types of performance, where I buy into that illusion. And to me, that's kind of that another secret ingredient to a performer, that they can do it as though they're doing it for the first time.
Well, you know, I teach students, don't memorize your story verbatim. You've lived your life. You know the experience. Right. You don't need to know every friggin' sentence. I mean, of course, even after every time I tell stories, and it's really funny because it's only been recently that I've stopped freaking myself out before I go out and tell a story.
Right.
Because normally I'd made myself miserable. You know, then go out there. But something happened when I was doing a Bawdy Storytelling about 1.5 years ago, that I walked out there and looked at this audience and I'm like, I'm just going to have fun. I'm just going to have fun.
Right.
Because the more I'm into it, the more authentic I am, the more vulnerable I am. But even then, after that, I go, oh shit, I forgot to say that sentence, and that's such a good sentence.
Right.
But we teach, don't memorize everything. Know your beginning, know your end.
Right.
Because if you're up there telling a story and it's verbatim and you mess up a sentence, you're fucked.
Right.
And storytelling audiences are some of the most loving, giving audiences in the world. It's very similar to improv audiences because they want you to succeed. So, you know, when we've done, you're at an improv show and there's a scene that just, it's not clicking, it's not working. Even there's some groans, and then all of a sudden it starts going and the audience just becomes so loving and so giving, and then therefore the improvisers are giving back. What's the same in storytelling? Said in my last class, because after doing stand-up and storytelling, stand-up audiences are kind of like, get me off. Make me laugh, monkey. Dance, monkey, dance. Where storytelling audiences are there to hear, they want to hear, and they're like, let's make love. And you can hear the Barry White going on. And you start connecting with the audience. And I mean, it doesn't happen every show, but that's the real difference between the audiences.
Right.
And again, that happens because storytellers tend to be authentic and vulnerable, sharing an experience of their lives to relate to someone else.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, obviously you teach it, you know a lot about it. You've done a lot of work with it and research and whatnot. So, do you get fixated or fascinated by, you know, the person at the bus stop who starts to tell you a story? Or,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Or anyone. I'm always, well, you do this. You sit down at a movie, and you know how it's going to end.
Right.
Probably within the first 5-10 minutes, right?
Sure, yeah.
My ex used to actually forbid me from talking. Because he, don't ruin this for me. I want to enjoy it without knowing what's going to happen. Well, isn't it fun when we're talking to someone and we don't really know them and they're sharing their story and we don't know how it's going to end? And that's the fun and the intrigue. And so if you're up there sharing a story, you kind of want to drop enough hints that the audience is, it's just like improv, they know where you're going before you do.
Oh, yeah.
But not giving it away, but giving them the payoff that they hope that would happen,
Right.
and not the surprise, and giving them that surprise, with them also being satisfied that, oh, well, I didn't think it was going to go there.
Well, and to pull in improv into it more, it reminds me of two things. One, Del Close used to always talk about this idea of always improvise as though the audience is 4 or 5 steps ahead of you, because they are.
They are, yeah. Yeah, they know.
Right. And then that also reminds me of something Keith Johnson talked about, which is the what comes next idea. So if you give the audience exactly what they're expecting, they're immensely satisfied, right? Rather than trying to outthink them.
Right.
Or, and I'm sure this is true in storytelling where you're building the thing and this is where it's going. And everyone in the audience knows where it's going. And when it gets there, everyone's like, oh my God, that was amazing.
Yeah. And-
Right. Versus pulling out the rug at the end of the story.
Right. And leaving them pissed off. And I mean, it's funny because I've been to storytelling shows where the storyteller really screwed over the audience by not giving them the satisfying. I mean, again, you're talking about the Moth where people are just sharing stories that are not necessarily storytellers. So those are different than other storytelling shows. But where they think they're going to be clever and funny and piss off the audience.
Right.
When we're sharing a story, improv on stage, the improvisers or the storytellers have an obligation to take care of the audience members and to safely take them. So again, I've seen storytellers share such vulnerable stories of pain that are so new that the poor audience is like, oh God, and we're all hurting for that person who's breaking down on stage, and I'm like, oh, that's a wound, not a scar. And
Right. And it's more about the storyteller than it is about the audience or whatever the
right.
whatever the room is.
Right.
It's like, yeah.
But then it's funny, Melissa and I actually used this example in class. We were at a Moth show where this gal was telling a story about falling into a fire pit and burning herself. And she was a great storyteller, except she kept going on and on about how the family put it out by peeing on it and the smell of the pee. And she spent a lot of time describing the smell of the pee and the burning flame, and the audience was just like, and I'm like, oh girl, you lost them. You're there. And I was like, Melissa and I were like, I know.
Right.
But again, not a professional storyteller, just up there sharing. How would she know?
Right. So, and this is a plug because Kent's going to be teaching a storytelling class in January.
Yep.
So come and take that class.
Thank you.
And as part of the plug, what are you hoping a student walks into your class with? And I don't mean by story content, but just how to, an approach, an attitude, maybe a couple skills that you kind of go, think about this, or.
Well, how do I want them to walk in with or walk away with?
Well, that's my follow-up question, but walk in with. So they come in, first time taking storytelling with Kent Whipple. What should I arrive with? And then the follow-up is, what do you hope I leave with?
I want a sense of play. I want them to have fun. I want them to come in and be willing to jump off the bridge, as far as, especially in the writing prompts and the writing exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we get so caught up in our editor, or as Natalie would say, monkey mind, that if you're able to get rid of that and forget Mrs. Kemp, your third grade teacher who said you'd never write. Fuck you, Mrs. Kemp. Sorry, not bitter. But being willing to just kind of experiment and then brave enough to follow down the rabbit hole. Because I see it every class, and surprised when I do a writing prompt myself, where it takes you down a rabbit hole and you go, okay, I thought this was going to be about this, but now we are way over here and this is a much better story that completely surprises. So I hope that they come in with the sense that of bravery and adventure,
Right.
to be willing to explore some of those. And it's funny because I don't think they'd be taking a storytelling class unless they were willing to do that. I haven't really ever had a student say, oh, I'm not going to do that.
Really? So you don't get students who sort of, I don't want to reveal anything about myself, I just want to learn how to tell the story? But, because that happens in improv all the time, where you just sort of see them going,
Interesting, because now after how many years, I mean, I've had people that didn't get it until near the end of the class.
Right.
But everyone has been open to the adventure. I mean, sometimes you get somebody who just doesn't get it, and they don't get it, but they want to, and It's not my job to judge them on that. It's my job to provide them the experience. And then you get those students who get excited and then start telling you, oh, did you listen to this podcast? Or did you see this? Or, Melissa has gone on and made it her life, and that is exciting to me.
Right.
As Cocteau said, when my friends succeed, I succeed with them. Notice I pulled out the pretentious Cocteau.
That's okay. I brought up Jung earlier. So we're in good company. And then after the class, what do you want people to learn?
Confidence. I want them to be able to walk out, either tell a story online or tell a story on stage and have the confidence to do it. And that to me is the bravest thing for me to watch is a storyteller coming on stage being willing to share a story of their life. That just, to me, is brave and kind of crazy. I'm like, why do we do that? Why would a sane person want to come out and expose their heart or experience to a bunch of strangers in the dark in front of lights? Because we crave that connection. And so it is, I hope, I teach, I say you're going to be able to tell a story on stage when you're done with this class.
Right.
And it's up to them whether they do it or not. And I've only had a couple of students not want to be able to do it. They got what they wanted on stage. I think you in improv, that's why in some of the upper level classes you want to try to create non-performance improv classes for the folks who just love it but don't want to perform. Don't want to obligate someone to perform if they don't want to, but it is my hope that they have the confidence to do so.
That's cool. I love the idea of feeling confident enough to present on stage in a storytelling format. Because,
Yeah, and I promised my online students that once we're able to come back to the theater, we're going to have a showcase on stage. Because the skills of telling a story well online is not necessarily the exact same skills of telling a story on. You don't have to worry about projection or mic skills or.
Right. I guess,
But I'm finding it really interesting. The new skills that we're acquiring to tell a story online are very transferable on stage because it's seeking that intimacy.
Right. So what are, say, 5 key differences that you've noticed with this move online?
Online performing and on stage performing.
I mean, you're mentioning things like, volume and things like that tend to not be an issue because somebody's working really intimate with a microphone, but are there other?
Well, yeah, also, when we're on stage, we're trying to make connections with multiple people by sharing part of my presence here, and part of my energy here, part of my energy here, part of my energy here.
Right.
Online, you don't need to do that because you're looking at a camera trying to make that connection to each individual who's watching the show through there. And that's a very different skill set. Mm-hmm. I tend to be very animated, which works on stage, but looks crazy online. I watched myself from an early story that I did online when I was like, that's creepy. Who does that? So, where you have to get a feeling to the back of the room in a theater takes a little more physical work than it does, say, than you would online.
Right.
We teach online to tell stories standing up. Don't be sitting down because you have more energy there.
Right.
And so it's the energy levels are one of the things. But I think taking that intimacy and trying to work the room like you would the camera.
Right.
And who knows, maybe skilled film actors, film/stage actors already know that, but that's been a growing thing that I think we've all learned as storytellers.
Right. Cool. So, in terms of storytelling, performing, or whatnot, I guess another two-sided question. I would love to hear, and you can do them in any order. I don't know, a time you felt like, wow, I just totally, not the best performance, but totally got into the room, totally got into that energy. Mm-hmm. And it felt really great, so I'd love to hear that. And then also the failure.
Oh, there's more of those.
Well, That's true in improv as well, right?
There are a lot
mean-
more of those than there are.
And don't overthink it. Just
No,
what,
no, I was
what
going to say,
comes to
there's
mind.
just at times where the story doesn't land, and I don't, you know, you go back and explore why. Now I can probably figure it out, but early on, that'd be like, that room hated me. They hated me, and you feel terrible because, you know, it's almost like I said, we have an obligation to the audience, and when you walk away feeling like you failed, you're like, I'm sorry I've taken your time. You won't get those 7 minutes back, and I know it was bad, you know it was bad, we all know it was bad.
Right.
And those are the lessons that we learn from. You take those to grow and become the better storyteller. But there have been like the moments there was a Moth GrandSLAM. And when I finished, I went out there, I was backstage and I was miserable. I told you about making myself miserable.
Right.
And I was like, oh, and I was reading it, and I was practicing out loud, and I gotta figure that out, I gotta do that part, and I'm trying to get the beats, and something happened when I opened up the door. This gigantic place, Town Square, Town Hall.
Town hall, yeah. Town hall.
Walking out the door and looking out and seeing this huge 1,400 people or something, and going, something happened. I went, I'm just gonna have fun. And I had so much fun, and it was one of the best stories I've ever had.
Right.
Because I just didn't give a fuck. I knew that I had the story. I know the story. It's the story of my life. I worked the story, and the audience was just so giving, and they were laughing at the right moments and connecting. And then at the end, when I got to share a surprise, I got to surprise them, and they were surprised. And that was just a wonderful moment. Then I had that at a Bawdy Storytelling show. And I love Bawdy Storytelling because it's like the Moth's naughty sister. You get to be a little more graphic than you would. You get to talk about the danger zones. But the audience was just so loving. And I left out a huge plot point, what I thought was a huge plot point. But they didn't know.
Right.
And it didn't really damage the story, and it was a great lesson for me to go, well, you know, if you do it up there with confidence, and even if you mess up one part, they're not going to know.
Right.
They didn't live your life. They're not going to go back, oh, no, Kent, really, this is what happened to you.
Right. Can't you left out the part about...
Yeah. So it's those times, but it's actually, those are fun and satisfying. But the failures are where you learn. And you've had to have had that in improv?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, but we have, you know, we both have the best intention, and I think that's why audiences can be a little more forgiving, because they want you to succeed.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
They don't want you to.
That's a huge part about audiences. That, and again, and I don't know if you encounter this with your storytelling students, but I definitely encounter it with improv students, which is just having to convince them that the audience came to have fun.
Right.
They're not here judging you or hoping you fail or, you know, wanting to watch the train wreck.
Well, there's going to be one asshole in the back who's always there.
Yes. Yeah, the person
But no,
is-
but yeah, people are there to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, and so it's like, own that. Like, really embrace the fact that, like, boy, you know, and the thing I say on stage, and maybe you say this in your storytelling class as well, is I said, because on top of it, just by walking out there, you've done something that most of them are terrified of doing, which is just getting up in front of a group of people. So you've already won.
Yeah.
You know, simply by just getting up there. And I imagine it's very true for storytelling. I mean, I know it's similar to improv, there's often, you know, students and people who are interested in storytelling who are watching it. But you also have that person that sits in the middle, doesn't talk a lot, orders a coffee and just sits and like wants to hear a story.
Right.
They're not interested in getting up and telling a story. They just want to enjoy the connection.
Right. And I think, like I said, I think anybody who's brave enough to go up and share a moment of their life with a bunch of strangers, they've already won in my book.
Right.
You know, that's something that, again, you said it, 90% of the people that are in the audience probably don't have the desire to do.
Right. So,
And yeah, now again, I'm geeking back on something about performing and stage fright. You know, stage fright, I read this thing that it talks about how it is almost instinctual to us as well, because it goes back when we were primates out in the plains, vulnerable in front of everyone.
right.
And I've had stage fright my whole life, but it gets better because I think. But even back when I was acting,
Right. Do you have a technique? Like you're backstage and you just tell yourself this, or?
I just actually it's something I learned in one of our improv classes in when I first started here 8 years ago. Be in the moment. Just it's hard to get nervous if you're in the moment.
Right.
If you're there.
Okay.
You know, and I tell the storytellers before every show, I tell my students, I'm like, you know, we may share stories again. You will share this story again 1,000,000 times. You will never have this moment again. So I try to remember that. Our Inside Story show, you know, if you remember, was the last show before we closed, before the pandemic.
Right.
And that was really in my head that night. And I wanted to make sure that we connected with I think we had 15 people that night.
Right.
That we connect with them because we'll never have this again.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows when? So I want to come back to improv for the ending. We have just a couple minutes left, but I did want to, for those who are interested, again, check out unexpectedproductions.org, and you can find out about Kent's class in storytelling. It starts January.
Second week in January.
Second
January
week in
9th. January
Okay.
9th.
And it's a great class. But leading up to that, what are your, I don't know, 3 or so resources that you can steer people to if they wanted to just learn more? I mean, you and I have talked about Mary Carr's book. You've shared lots of books with me about storytelling. But are there other resources, or are those the books? Or what
Well,
books?
there are several books that Matthew Dix has written, one of the prime books on storytelling called Storyworthy, that I think is brilliant. Margot Lightman, who wrote, Margot, I am so sorry, I'm spacing the name of your book. I use it 1,000,000 times, and Margot's a friend. Margot Lightman wrote an amazing storytelling book that's named, I can't.
Right, and she's taught here.
She's taught here, and she's going to be teaching here again in the fall, or
Right.
in the spring. And that's an amazing source. I've loved the classes through Risk and taking with those. But I go back to Natalie. Natalie, writing down the bones. You want to get creative, get that book. Read that book. I've given away, I probably bought her a house with as many books as I've given her copies that I've given away for that. But writing down the bones.
Cool.
And
Cool.
those, I mean, I use writing down the bones almost every day, even weekly. You know, I do story prompts daily.
Right. And is it on a regular schedule? So like in the morning?
In the mornings.
Right.
In the mornings. Because I think anyone can find 15 minutes a day to write.
Right.
And I'm already a diva at work. If I didn't do that, if I didn't write daily, the demons would be so bad you all would hate me. It just calms me. So
Right.
I try to get 15 minutes a day in.
Huh.
Sometimes it goes longer, sometimes it's less, but it's easy to set a timer for 15 minutes and just write, free fall.
Right, and I love the notion because a lot of writers will talk about that, and I can't remember who it was. A well-known author who might now be dead was talking about just sitting down. I think it was for half an hour. I'm going to write for a half hour, and even if I don't write, I just sit for a half hour, and sometimes page after page, sometimes nothing.
Right.
But it's that half hour of time of just getting in that kind of meditation around writing.
It's totally meditative. And some of my best stories have come out of the rabbit hole
Right.
in doing that. So I highly recommend that.
Cool.
And then also there's great storytelling podcasts that are out there. Listen to those. Pixar has an online storytelling class
Really?
that's free
Wow.
through, I think, the Khan Academy, where they talk about why Pixar stories are so popular, and it's all basic stories. One whole section on Once Upon a Time there was, and because of that, and because
Right,
of that,
right,
and
right.
because of that,
Right.
and now. So,
Cool. So to begin wrapping up, I want to kind of come back to improv. And this is not so much about, well, it is a story, I guess, but not so much about storytelling as
Margaret's book, long story short. Sorry.
Nice save. Coming back to improv, though, so you've been here, again, 8 years, really?
2012.
Yeah, been focusing on UP performers instead of last, and again, I mentioned it last week as well, I'm floored by how long people have been around.
Right.
Because everything I think about, I go, oh, that was like a year ago, 2 years ago, that must be it. And it's like, no, it was 15 years
Yeah.
ago. And you're like, oh. And by the way, before I mention it, you're the second in a row from the University of New Mexico who are
Represent! Go Knights!
So not that it's a requirement to be on the show, but 2 weeks in a row, because Sarah Hanchart went there.
Yep.
Anyway, getting back to improv, you've been here for 8 years. You've done theater, you've done storytelling, and I'm just curious on a personal level, what has improv taught you in these last few years, since you're working so intimately with it?
Great question. Listen. Listen. You can't create good improv without listening. And then sacrificing your ideas. You know, one of the things I love about our improv school and our improvisers and everyone here is our goal is to make our partner look good. And if you come to it with that philosophy, and you come to it and say, you know, we're going to build a story instead of we're going for the laugh, that can only be done by listening and sacrificing your golden calves. You know, because you all are amazing improvisers. When we do Inside Story and I have to try to do some improv, it scares the shit out of me because I'm not that brave. I like to have a story that I know I'm going to share. But if you go out there and be willing, you know, you have an idea in your head, you're backstage and you're coming out getting ready to do that, and the story changed, you got to kill that calf and say, got to listen.
Right.
So it's being willing to sacrifice for the story. I don't know, that's kind of my thought of what we do here. Well, I mean, we don't really sacrifice calves. We don't. It's not.
That's our new show.
Yeah.
Sacrificing the cat.
But yeah, just listening, and that's, again, you become a better storyteller when you're listening to other people tell their stories. That's the other, do you want to become a good storyteller? Go listen to stories. Go watch stories. Because you're going to learn what to do, and you're going to learn what not to do.
Right.
And that's another great resource. But that's one of the things I've learned here, is to, and be willing to let go of your idea and just listen.
Cool. So we were seeing some images of Kent, various stages,
Oh,
telling stories. So thank you, Kent.
thanks, Randy.
And
And thanks, Jay, for being up there.
yeah, Jay's back there.
Teching on us and making us look good. I haven't been able to see, and I'm sorry I didn't see questions. Wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, and
I got bad. Oh, Janine wrote, long story short, thank you. Thank you, you had my back.
So again, Kent Whipple teaches storytelling here. He'll be teaching a new class starting the second week of January. Again, we have our fundraiser a week from today, very special Christmas carol, so we hope you'll buy a ticket to that and or give a donation. Thanks to all the people who have already been coming to Christmas Carol and giving donations on top of their paying for the tickets, so we appreciate that. And again, we have these T-shirts that we can sell to you, put your picture on it, and you can sit in this audience, at least on a T-shirt for now. 4 shows a week, Wednesday through Saturday. And then we have this event happening on Saturday afternoons, which you know of because you're watching it. And is there anything else we need to?
Oh, we need to, the improv school, we start our winter quarter in January. And our class size is small, so it's intimate and it will give you the best experience you can have. And so please join us, take a class, get out of your safety zone. And that's also on our website at www.unexpectedproductions.org.
Cool. Well, Kent, thank you so much for doing this, but also, again, publicly, thank you for all the work that you do for Unexpected Productions, because you've done so much, and especially during this COVID time, you've come up with so many creative ideas on how to make this thing work. So I'm hoping that it won't have to be too much longer. But knock on wood, that we'll have to do this. But thank you for that.
Thanks, Randy.
So
And thank you.
Yeah, take care. And again, we have a Christmas Carol tonight at 8:30. If you're looking for something to do tonight, and it's going to be running through December 23rd. And again, some of that last week, it's during the week as well. So be sure to check that out. And thank you so much for watching.
Bye. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's and I think it's good to have the like connecting it to improv, but because I think that's something improvisers don't really think about because they're thinking too much about, at least beginning with students, they're thinking too much about laughs.
Yeah.
And going for the joke versus